Hi, this is Kim Droptiny. I'm on chapter 36 of Gold Cord by Amy Carmichael. This is the prelude to chapter 36. Art thou not marching to music, conquering Christ? Hark to the trumpets and bugles sounding afar. Welcome the glow in the east that declareth the morning star. All souls are thine, not the foeman's conquering Christ. Passeth like dream of the sleeper dark heathendom. Hasteth the jubilant hour when thy kingdom, O Lord, shall come. Praise waiteth for thee in Zion, conquering Christ. Crowned shalt thou be, and beloved, and reverenced then. Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Chapter 36, Pavilions and a Festival. Among our little ones, there are some, fewer, thank God, than might be expected, who are disabled in some way. Several are deaf, several, because of inherited twist, need specially careful training. Just over the border of the native state of Travancore, there is a patch of rocky hillside overlooking the place where in ancient days the three kings of Travancore, Madura, and Tanjore used to meet in council, and so it was called Three Pavilions. The pilgrim road to Cape Comorin, the extreme end of the great trunk road at India, skirts the hillside, and within an evening's walk little villages lie on pockets among trees or strewn on the plain. Standing on the rocks, you can see the blue line of the Indian Ocean. From that sea, from April till September, the southwest wind blows over the rocks, and from September till April they are swept by the colder northeast wind, so that to be there is like being on board ship in a perpetual gale. The calm days are few. It is a wild place given up to elemental things. Glories of wider views of sunrise and sunset, mountains magnificent in cloud and storm, a tumble of wild rocks looking out upon an empty world, with wild winds racing over it. This hillside, some 60 acres, in part rock, in part fallow land, was offered to us unexpectedly in 1925. The price was £3 an acre. We bought it. We signed the check on our knees. There were times in the 5 years that followed when the remembrance that we had done so was comforting, for from the first there were difficulties. When it was known that we were considering the place, there was a burst of angry protest from the priests in a small roadside temple a mile or so from the rocks. They sent a petition to the government of Travancore asking that we might not be allowed to buy, and the Hindus who owned the fields on the lower levels were afraid that a blight would fall on the crops if Christians looked down on them all the year round. This was encouraging, however, for the devil does not waste ammunition. The old head priest became our friend eventually. Poor old man, he told us that he had served his God for 40 years and gained neither joy nor peace nor hope. And a plentiful rain that first year turned the fear of curse into assurance of blessing. So the landowners round about welcomed us. The difficulties that mattered most were different. We built a house for workers and a delightful nursery school, and sent our delicate little ones there in charge of faithful Akals, and the children throve. If ever you turn this place into a TB sanatorium, let me know, said a doctor, who went out to pavilions before we had built much there. Illness is practically unknown on that high land, and the battle with the wind seems to put new life into the children. One day, when it blew a smaller one over, a tiny boy indignantly struck out at it with his fists. The wind was a person to him. Tired girls for whom we planned quiet rooms, and who found among the rocks the blessed solitude of a cave, came back refreshed and talked of the wonderful feeling of spaciousness after our crowded Donipur. They found pavilions enchanting. some convalescing after operations were sent, and all came back well. And yet there was something lacking. No one living there, except the small children, thought of the place as home. Even the married Lotus Bud, whom we hoped would settle, as she had her husband and baby, felt banished. The Akals were strangers in a strange land, and true to their Tamil nature, they were one and all chronically and hopelessly homesick. Different members of the fellowship stayed there and did what they could, and we went out from time to time and tried to pull the scattered units together, but we knew that they would drift apart before we could return. What Pavilions needed was to have two of its own. But they must be a special two. Not any two would do. The place might be the door of heaven, and the glow of a golden sunset. One of the colony wrote that name in Tamil on a signboard and put it by the road, whereupon an able-bodied beggar passing, thinking such a name could only mean food for nothing, came up and was disappointed, and on returning smashed the notice board. Even so, it was what some would call lonely, and it was certainly windy. The two must be able to enjoy wind, and one must be a homemaker by instinct, not only peaceful and happy herself, but knowing how to draw others into peace and happiness. And because some of our tired ones needed more than beauty and fresh air, she must be one to whom it had been given to be a repairer of broken walls, a restorer of paths leading home. Our forest houses are not possible at all seasons, nor is Joppa, the house we were afterwards given by the sea. But here, within easy reach, was a place to which we could at any time send those needing rest. If only we could have someone who would make home for them and the others there, the place would be like the pleasant arbor about midway to the top of the hot hill difficulty, a house of comforting to body and to soul. And the other, was it too much to ask for a trained teacher for the deaf and backward? And more than that, a true lover of such little ones, and perhaps unlovable older ones too. Lord, what is thy will about it? What is thy will for these children, for this place? Lord, by the riches of thy grace, open my eyes that I may see, and in the shining of thy face, reveal thy will to me. And all the time he who worketh for him that waiteth, for him was working for us. And in an English vicarage and in a Scottish parsonage he had chosen and was preparing the two of our heart's desire. For in the English vicarage, a mother was training her daughter in those home-loving, home-making ways that cannot be learned anywhere so well as in such a home as Vivian Tompkins is. And when she came to us in 1930, almost our first thought was, she is the one for Pavilions. But the language came first, and we said nothing till she was ready for her first examination. And then we knew what God had done, for to her had come the feeling that is evidence that Pavilions was the place of his choice for her. And the year that we signed that check for Pavilions saw Jean Ewing in the University of Edinburgh, and to her already it had been given to care for the shut-in, deaf children whom she had seen Sunday by Sunday in her father's church. She knew how much they were missing. So, after taking her degree, she had gone into training and had become a skilled teacher of the deaf and a lover of little hurt things. Her mother had called their home in Butte, Donapur. There had been prayer links for years, and the sympathy of purpose which unites hearts, but we had not even heard of this gift that was being prepared for us till the close of 1930. Then in his time God moved, and the gift was given. And lest we should ever question this that he had done, remembering other and far larger spheres, he granted a certain assurance both to her and to us, so that her call should be among the things that cannot be shaken. One moonlit night, we were returning late from Pavilions, when a long string of men in white, looking ghostly in the white light, passed us, traveling south. They were pilgrims bound for a festival at Siva's temple by the sea, and they were crossing the fields by a shortcut which runs near our house. On such nights, the people of pavilions have opportunities for scattering the imperishable seed, and to some of us the chance is given to follow those pilgrims to the festival. A festival is a thing that words cannot show. The outward scene is merely the colored shell of something hidden but very powerful. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood the angel for 3 full weeks. The prince of the kingdom of India, his is the power within the colored shell. For how long will he withstand? There is a sense of such a withstanding. You feel as though you were being pushed back and thrust down by unseen hands. And yet, you cannot let yourself be pushed back and thrust down. After a while, you begin to feel very tired. A day feels like a week. Is it because of that strange pressure? Does spiritual resistance exhaust the whole being? It would seem so. But following that string of pilgrims to that festival, we come to something that may be partly shown. There are 2 temples in the town. The greater one belongs to the god known as Siva's son, the smaller, at the further end of the town, to his wives. In the favorite wife's shrine, the light is bright. In the lesser, that of the goddess Devani, it burns dimly. From this comes a proverb: to burn like Devani's light is to be discouraged, discontented. These 2 temples are connected by a street, which at festival times is converted into a matted corridor. In this one street, there are scores of houses devoted to sin. A friend had engaged a shop front for our brothers, and in this enclosure they sat in turn, talking with those who came in, giving away tracts, selling gospels and books to any who would buy them. Between them and the door of the house, a couple of sacks were hung, and the life on the other side of the sacks was like that of the other houses. One day, as they sat in their shop, a hand was pushed around the sack. They put a gospel into it, and afterwards, through the open door of the house opposite, saw a woman sitting reading, for these women can read. But later, when we went to visit that house, a man came between us and the woman. He would not leave us for a moment alone with her, and she dared not speak in his presence. I leave the picture with you. A woman in captivity sitting on the floor reading the gospel. A man who has power over her, determined to hold her in her chains. Visiting in that town is like diving into a cesspool. The heartbreak there is to see children, babies like bright flowers as it were, on the edge of that pool. There are changes being made in the law. They will not be allowed to dedicate children to the gods while they are so young, said an old man. But what of the law? They will do as they choose. And, remembering those houses with rooms opening one upon another, unlighted, secure, and remembering too the courts of the temple, its maze of halls and cloisters, and low vaulted recesses, we could imagine we heard the devil laugh at our sanguine credulity. For how can law change a custom which can be continued in secret? Reading certain pages of Things as They Are, after years of slowly won knowledge, I wonder at my early hopes. We are thankful that some are working for a better law. It is a move in the right direction, but we put not our trust in princes or any powers of this present age. The coming of the Lord of righteousness is the one hope, as we see it, for this land. But it is the hope. And we walked between the temples and the sea. We saw heaped up piles of granite pillars, the sculpture of base and capital often perfect, and there were vast masses of cut stone lying about everywhere. The temple is so rich that it is continually pulling down and rebuilding, and this mile of tumbled stone making a wall by the sea is the result. So it has been ever, so it will ever be, said a Hindu who stood near us and had observed us looking at the fallen masonry. We told him then of the time when the towering walls above us will be like these scattered piles. The thought of some beautiful picture shown by a guest to our children just before we left home, picture showing prophecy fulfilled in history, the cities of old days with their palaces and temples overthrown, was a great stay through those days in the midst of the visible and apparently impregnable fortresses of heathendom. That Hindu took us to a temple of shrine carved in the face of a rock. It was evening, and not many pilgrims were about, and no Brahmin priests. So he did what I do not think is often done, if ever. He brought us inside, led us through a narrow passage cut into the heart of the rock to a square hole halfway up the wall, through which we crept, and found ourselves in a small, dark, clammy cell. There by our flashlight we saw the idol. Standing there, shut in by walls and roof of rock, with the sound of the sea murmuring far away, in the presence of that usurping thing, we stood together and claimed the town of Siva's son for the Lord of heaven and earth. Meanwhile, our brothers were at work in the streets, talking one by one with men and boys, as ambassadors beseeching, as Daily Light had it on one of the days we were there. Once a lad came to the little shop front. He wanted to escape for an hour, he said, from the pernicious life about him, and he found his way to the one clean place in that town as to a city of refuge. Without shedding of blood is no remission. These are among the words that a knowledge of this town underlines. The blood of Jesus Christ, his Son, cleanseth us from all sin, all, even this that we must meet in towns where the spirit of uncleanness visibly reigns. These towns are Jerichos, and not one wall of any of them has been shaken yet, but much less fallen down. We found an unexpected welcome in a house where an old musician whom we had met before happened to be staying. We spent an hour or more there, and to get our opportunity, had to listen to a younger singer chanting a long, plaintive song which the old musicians accompanied on his little harmonica. It was kindliness and courtesy which made them offer this. But as we sat together on the floor of that front room, with the feel of the night life of the town about us, for the streets were full of sound and movement, and the old lady of the house beat perfect time to the intricate music, we longed to get to something that mattered far more. In the end, we had a chance, and next day we were with them again. But they were too excited to listen then. Their ear was intent upon the rumble of voices in the street. That long strip of straight street was like a herbaceous border, gay with women in crimson, orange, yellow, purple, blue, sometimes sun-washed or water-washed to lovely harmonies, sometimes bright from the loom. Soon the rumble grew to a roar, and there was the blare of a band, and the shout of the elephant's escort, and the great beast came with state. Just in front of our house he stopped and knelt, while a naked brown baby, kicking hard, was hoisted up and set astride upon his neck. Then he curled back his trunk, and we saw a tangled up struggle, for the child was shrieking with all its might. Not a sound, of course, could be heard above the noise. And something it held was being forced out of its hand into that waiting trunk. This done, it was inarticulate with indignation by this time. It was handed back to its gratified parents, and the procession moved on. It had been ill, and this was the fulfillment of a vow. But the intense moment came later. The roar of voices increased. The herbaceous border had vanished. Not a woman was on the street. It was now a solid mass of men. A few policemen flicked what looked like dusters in the faces of those who would not let themselves be pushed out of the way. For now, in the midst of another dense throng, led by another band in a sort of uniform, came the idol's palanquin, carried on the shoulders of many bearers who staggered under the load. All down the long street, at regular intervals to be placed on them, were set for the help of the bearers. But even so, they stumbled with weariness. Then the whole street burst out in acclamations. A forest of brown arms flung up hailed as God that which our Holy One calls an abomination. I am the Lord, that is my name, and my glory will I not give to another, neither my praise to graven images. Thus saith the Lord, the King of Israel, and the Redeemer, the Lord of hosts. I am the first, and I am the last, and beside me there is no God. Is there a God beside me? Yea, there is no God, I know not any. Words like these move and breathe at such times. The idol was set back in the palanquin so that it could hardly be seen. Heavy wreaths of flowers hung around its neck, and we had been told that it was covered with jewels. Next time his adornment will be emeralds, said our old friend. Today he wears all manner of precious gems. On one side of the idol, hidden by the draperies of the palanquin, was a young girl. On the other side, a young man. They received the people's offerings. The procession passed on, the flower-bedecked palanquin swinging as the men who bore the poles swayed beneath it. The hoarse, strong shouts of thousands beat about us like the waves of a rough sea. The visible representative of the Prince of the Kingdom of Indian passed on to the temple of his wives. But now, for our eyes were toward the morning, here is a fragment of a story that is linked to that same temple by the sea. It looks back for a moment to an earlier day, to a day when we were out in the villages, and nothing seemed to have been done. It was years before we knew that a child of 12, who had heard once or one of those village preachings, had been taken to Siva's temple by the sea, and the hope that her newborn faith would be shattered by the amazement of that show. See her then, eagerly searching through the courts and innermost shrines of the temple, with one of her relatives who has entrance to all the corners of that great mysterious place. Nothing escapes the scrutiny of this ardent child. Gods, she is saying to herself. No, they are dead idols. There is no life in them. Still she searches, knowing what lies behind, paying no regard to the tinsel that tries to look like gold. Vain, vain, it is all vain, is her verdict. And her thought flies back to a well side in her own village, to a little group standing there, to words about a living God that arrested her and held her kneeling upright on her mat all through the night that followed, to a song learned in a tent where one who had been in that group was singing to the children who were gathered in the tent, to the sense of peace and certainty that came when she spoke with that living God. And in her heart of hearts, she knew that him only she must serve. Months passed. She was delivered from the enfolding Hinduism, then carried back into it, threatened, struck, and far worse, spat upon. She will never forget what it was to hear that he, the Holy One, had suffered that indignity. And at last she was given back to us, to be beloved child, fellow warrior, dearest friend, for that child was Urulai. And that's the end of chapter 36. And yes, I might have to take a break for a while. I hope not. I hope I'll have time to do this. But God bless you. Thank you for listening, and please share.